I get it. Life's busy. Get a job, find a home, pay the bills. Then at night, we doom scroll.
Temperatures are rising.
Sea levels are getting higher.
We thought the scientists would fix this, but they did their bit. They've been sounding the alarm ever since, and yet emissions have never been higher, showing that this is no longer a science problem. It's a human one. And right now, we're failing. I work with some of the world's leading social researchers, so I decided to ask them, can we fix this?
Extreme material is actually psychologically addictive, and that is what's likely to go viral, and that's what's likely to be monetised.
Climate change is a justice issue.
Climate fiction can be very powerful for promoting different ways of thinking about the environment.
There are certain things that we require to exist. Once those essential requirements are taken away, we will be extinct. It will happen.
These academics all work in the same faculty, and each has dedicated their career to understanding the human climate problem. But their research couldn't be more different. From fiction, to classrooms, to stolen rivers, to the darkest corners of the internet, their work reveals the many forces driving the crisis. So if we want to find a solution, we first have to understand the problem.
The cause of global warming is fossil fuel burning, of course, but behind that is an idea that humans have unlimited access to unlimited resources.
Emily has spent the last 20 years researching the connection between literature and cultural attitudes towards global warming.
Stories are really powerful ways in which our cultural values, our understandings of history, our ways of thinking about ourselves and our world are transmitted. And we have a history in Australia, unfortunately, of telling stories that are sympathetic to extractive logics. By extractive logic, I mean ways of thinking about the world that reduce it to sort of passive materials that humans can dig up, drain, use for their own benefit. That depletes resources.
Extractive logic isn't abstract. It lives in the way we shop, upgrade, replace. A new bag, a new phone, a new car. Tiny hits of satisfaction that come at a permanent environmental cost.
Researchers like Emily have dedicated their lives to understanding how we absorb these ways of thinking, so we can begin to unlearn them. But first, we need to make sure we don't pass them on to our kids. And that, it turns out, is far more challenging than it seems.
Some young people do not have the same opportunities to learn about climate change and connect those to lived experiences of injustices locally and globally.
Eve Mays specialises in education justice. She studies how young people come to understand climate change and how they can critically examine the systems that shape that understanding.
Because of the current inequalities in school funding, there are different opportunities for young people to learn and make connections to their lives in ways that are meaningful. And the issue here is an issue of opportunities for critical and creative modes of climate literacy. How are we preparing young people to step into that world and to interrogate who's produced this text, what is the purpose of this text, who's the intended audience, what are they trying to do to persuade me. When we have reduced funding or redistributed funding, then we have had a rise in what's often described as philanthropy.
But this isn't philanthropy in the usual sense. It has a name: pedagogy.
So pedagogy is the fancy education jargon word for teaching and learning, and pedagogy is when that is driven and shaped by petro interests.
In simple terms, it's when fossil fuel companies provide funding to schools in exchange for influence over what their students learn about climate change.
And there's a spectrum of influence where it might just be that there's some marketing material, but it might range all the way through to influence on the curriculum, on the teaching resources around, say, for example, teaching carbon capture and storage as the best solutions.
Fossil fuels are responsible for almost 80% of global emissions, while the profit goes to the wealthiest 1%. And despite knowing the damage they're causing, energy corporations seem to be going out of their way to prevent meaningful climate action. It feels unjust. Some might even call it criminal. And in many cases, it is.
Fortunately, the way things are, certain individuals benefit. Certain large-scale corporate entities benefit. They have enormous things to gain, and that is power and profit.
And often, that profit is gained through illegal practices. This is known as environmental crime, a field Professor Rhys Walters has spent his entire life researching.
As a green criminologist, my entire working life is focused on crimes and harms against the essentials of life: air, water and food for power and profit.
Rhys is the chief investigator of the first green criminology project ever funded by the ARC. Its focus? Water theft.
There's not enough water to go around, and we have those who need it, the mining industry, the agricultural industry, taking more than they should at the expense of others. In my opinion, the Murray-Darling Basin could be seen as one of the largest crime scenes in the Southern Hemisphere.
Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and our limited water supply is already under threat from climate change. So when corporations illegally extract water, the consequences can be devastating.
The Murray-Darling Basin is an ecological wonderland. It traverses 3,300 kilometres. Almost 40% of all of Australia's food comes out of the Murray-Darling Basin. It is subject to massive corporate plunder. The cotton industry, the grape industry, the almond industry, certain agricultural and horticultural industries exceeding water take, flagrantly flouting law to take and steal water for their use. So the combination of human-induced climate change with illegal behaviour has taken the Murray-Darling Basin to the precipice of ecological collapse.
In talking to each of these academics, one thing has become glaringly clear. Environmental harm is rarely democratic. The wealthiest actors contribute the most damage, while the poorest communities absorb the consequences.
What we really are up against is the privileging of profit for a few at the expense of the majority.
If we do nothing, I think we will have a gap between those who have access to specialised forms of knowledge and those who might be open to simple answers that scapegoat others or that vilify others.
Never has collective action been more essential, yet social media is rife with blame and anger. History reminds us that in moments of crisis, blame offers an easy comfort. It also reminds us that the ones we target are rarely the cause, and they are always the ones who bear the weight.
A common far-right narrative is blaming people from so-called developing or less advantaged parts of the world, to see them as sort of polluting in both of those senses of the word.
Dr. Imogen Richards has spent years analysing far-right online discourse, how these narratives spread, mutate and slip into the mainstream.
Those narratives are not just repeated within sort of so-called far right, they're also represented in the political mainstream very prominently. So online, we see, the algorithmic curation of content, which rewards sound bites, discourages nuanced debate, encourages sensationalism. Extreme material is actually psychologically addictive, and that is what's likely to go viral, and that's what's likely to be monetised.
Once climate change is framed through blame, it becomes easy to turn fear into an us versus them story. Migrants and displaced people stop being seen as people in crisis and start being cast as the crisis itself.
And this is actually structurally contributing to those conditions which allow for the emergence of what we now see is the really sharp end of unabashed white supremacy. It isn't the factories, it isn't the people who are working in the factories in the less advantaged parts of the world who are primary drivers. Some of the main drivers are things like global freight, like iPhones being made with parts from 40 different countries.
And the irony is stark. The very technologies used to spread this blame are built through the same extractive systems fueling the crisis.
We see Facebook used, for example, blaming migrants for all sorts of social conditions. Children who are working in mines in the Congo to mine the rare earth essential minerals which are going into producing those iPhones.
But facts no longer seem to matter. What Imogen found wasn't a coherent climate argument, but a propaganda method echoing older fascist strategies.
Sometimes they're going with really what works, for propaganda. And the wider political environment as well for that is an undermining, I suppose, of a shared notion of truth, this sort of post-truth environment, which is reminiscent of historical fascist attitudes in the lead up to World War II, so a burning of books, a sort of a rejection of rationality.
Fake news, rage bait, conspiracy churn. While we argue with each other online, emissions continue rising in the background. So what happens if these systems continue unchecked?
In 30 years' time, if nothing
Flooding,
improves,
coastal erosion,
Mass
flourishing
displacement, people,
environments,
drought,
the cultural
increasing wealth
identities,
disparity,
millions of
devastating
people
circumstances
completely
of climate
decimated.
change.
Young people are inheriting
To the peril of communities
a world
and to
that
ecosystems.
is impacted by biodiversity loss, contamination, and they have done very little to contribute to that problem.
And how does that, as a person, how does that make you feel?
Annoyed. Angry, yeah. Frustrated to tears. And wanting to do something about it.
Thankfully, this isn't where the story ends. At least, it doesn't have to be. The academics I've been speaking with have dedicated their lives to tackling these challenges, and they're not alone. There are millions of people out there fighting for our future, hidden heroes working tirelessly to make things right. So let's talk about how we can fix this.
We are at that precipice, but we have not fallen over the edge yet. So I'm optimistic. The priorities of the fiscal environment, where a small number of billionaires are growing and the rest of us are falling behind, is not healthy. And I have great faith in this next generation because they see that there is something bigger and better. It's recognising that if we live in harmony with our environment, we can benefit. And this research is trying to shift that dialogue, to fundamentally change our relationship with fresh water, to see it not as a commodity, but as a living, breathing entity. Its health is our health. I'm also incredibly encouraged by the next generation who we teach at university and their environmental consciousness, their desire to do something different. School children taking climate action, school children lodging legal cases. I mean, it's wonderful to see that we have a generation who are not focused on power and profit. They're focused on a future.
What the young people that we've spoken to and their mentors and teachers have talked about is unlearning some of the extractive, capitalist ways of living and learning and relating to each other and to the world that are destroying the earth and also turning people against each other. So this is also about young people considering how to care in collective ways for each other. So it's not just about individual behaviour modification or recycling, as good as those things are, but about collective action.
We need to tell different stories, and we also need to listen to the other stories that are there. Climate fiction can be very powerful for promoting different ways of thinking about the environment. Very powerful writing can situate the reader in the midst of a climate-altered world and make them feel it.
But actually trying to translate and share more widely an understanding and make accessible the main factors that contribute to the situations in which we find ourselves, and then the options that are available to us for planning the kinds of societies that we want to live in going forward.
Indigenous Australian culture offers an absolute counterpoint to the idea of extraction.
So many of the young people that we've spoken to and their mentors have talked about listening to and wanting to learn from First Nations peoples and from Indigenous ways of knowing, being, doing and relating that are healing and that are showing another way to relate to the earth.
It's now time to listen to Indigenous voices if we want to ensure that the Murray-Darling Basin does not reach the point of ecological collapse.
Though their research areas differ, these academics all share one common theme. Our shift to hyper-individualism is killing us. And if we want to survive this, we must make caring for one another not just a priority, but a civil duty. And it makes me wonder, what would the world look like if we actually lived that way?
I think in 30 years' time we'd see a world where care-based systems had come to the fore.
The slogan that's often used is "no one left behind." So there is no one that is hungry, no one that is left struggling, that there is that community level of support.
There would be much less social violence, there would be much less racial violence.
Deeper public connectedness, deeper civic awareness.
Skies that are clearer, oceans that are full of healthy life.
In some parts of the world, children are taught empathy lessons, for example. I mean, imagine if that were a more popular practice globally.
If I could freeze the human race for 30 years and then unfreeze us in 3 decades, then the natural environment would look beautiful. 1 million square kilometres of basin water filled with plants and animals that we've never seen before. You're going to see people moving from the cities to the regions of the Murray-Darling Basin and living lives that are productive, constructive, healthy and vibrant.
So how exactly do we make that future a reality? These researchers and many others have dedicated their lives to answering that. Here's some of the work they're doing right now.
So Striking Voices is a intergenerational research project that has run for 4 years. And what we've wanted to do is grow together and think and reflect together about their own experiences of growing up and sometimes being in the climate justice movement. But also then we've gone and had conversations with other young people about what does climate justice look like, but also what does climate justice education or educating for climate justice look, sound and feel like. And it's been a privilege to also kind of co-create and make sense of that in collective ways in workshops and in zine making and collaging to explore intersectional and intergenerational justice.
I do work with reading in communities, books that might be about climate change but are always about place in some way. And I sit with community groups and we read books together and we talk about these books. And what I've found with this research is that reading books together offers a really powerful way for people to give voice to their concerns, anxieties, but also their hopes and thoughts about how change can occur. I remember a conversation that I had in a book group with young adult readers about climate change, and it opened up a discussion about the local river and people's sadness that they weren't able to swim in the river in summer anymore. So these sorts of shared spaces for a whole lot of complex feelings around climate change and what it brings up, they come into being when this kind of work occurs and is done well.
I'm leading a team of 10 to examine the socio-economic impacts of water theft in the Murray-Darling Basin. Who are the perpetrators, why they perpetrate, and what are we doing about them? I would also like to see the Murray-Darling Basin be granted a human rights status, to be given personhood. Once you elevate a river to a living entity and give it the rights of humanity, you also give it certain legal protections. We need a national regulator with real teeth to exercise and implement penalties, that the time for warning comes to an end.
I want to understand the social conditions, relationships and ways in which we treat one another. Those connections that we have provide opportunity for that mutual empowerment, for bringing about a way of being and imagining what kind of a world do we actually want to live in.
What kind of world do we want to live in? After speaking with these researchers, I went home, tucked my babies into bed and sat with that question as I watched them sleep. Of course, I want them to inherit a world with clean air, thriving forests and drinkable water. But more than that, I want it to be a world where people choose empathy over greed and the common good over self-interest. We are at a crossroads, and every choice we make is deciding what kind of future we leave behind. So next time you go to buy an item or share an angry post or simply stay silent, stop and ask yourself, what kind of world am I creating? And if it's not the one you want, choose again.